I never thought 23 years of dedication could be destroyed by a single sentence from a 25-year-old who had never worked a day in his life. But sometimes life teaches you that blood isn't thicker than water, and family isn't always defined by DNA. What happened next would test everything I believed about loyalty, respect, and what it truly means to build something meaningful with your own hands. My name is Marcus, and I've been the operations manager at Henderson Construction Company in Portland, Oregon for over 2 decades. When I started working for Robert Henderson in 2001, I was fresh out of college with a degree in business management and dreams bigger than my bank account. The company was small then, just Robert, 2 contractors, and a secretary named Helen who made the best coffee in the Pacific Northwest. Portland's construction industry was booming in those days, with new developments sprouting up everywhere from the Pearl District to Southeast Division, and Robert had positioned Henderson Construction to ride that wave of growth. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to our channel to help us bring you more real-life experiences like this one. Also, comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We love connecting with our global audience. Robert Henderson was the kind of man who commanded respect without demanding it. At 55, he had calloused hands that told stories of years spent on construction sites, and eyes that could spot a problem from across a job site. His weathered face bore the marks of decades working under Oregon's unpredictable weather, from scorching summer heat to the relentless winter rain that defines the Pacific Northwest. He treated his employees like family, and in return we gave him everything we had. I remember my first day clearly. It was raining heavily, typical Portland weather that soaked through everything and made the construction sites muddy and treacherous. I showed up in a cheap suit that was already getting soaked, looking like every other college graduate who thought they understood the real world. Robert took one look at me and handed me a hard hat and a rain jacket. "Office work can wait," he said with a grin that would become familiar over the years. "You need to understand what we're building before you can help me run it." That philosophy became the foundation of our relationship and shaped everything I learned about business over the next 2 decades. Robert didn't just want managers sitting in climate-controlled offices pushing papers around. He wanted people who understood the business from the foundation up, literally. I spent my first 6 months learning every aspect of construction, from pouring concrete foundations in the early morning fog to installing electrical systems while the rain drummed against temporary roofing. My hands got dirty, my back got sore, my clothes got ruined, and I loved every minute of it. By the end of that first year, I wasn't just an employee collecting a paycheck. I was Robert's right-hand man, and Henderson Construction was growing faster than we had ever imagined possible in Portland's competitive market. The company expanded throughout the 2000s, and I was there for every milestone, every challenge, every victory that shaped Henderson Construction into one of Portland's most respected builders. When we landed our first $1 million contract in 2004, a luxury home renovation in the West Hills overlooking the Willamette River, Robert and I celebrated with cheap beer and expensive dreams on the job site while watching the sunset paint the city in golden light. When we opened our second office in Salem in 2007, I was the one who found the location, negotiated the lease, and spent weekends driving back and forth between Portland and Salem to oversee both operations. The expansion represented everything we had worked toward, proof that Henderson Construction could compete with the larger firms while maintaining the personal touch that set us apart. When the 2008 recession hit the construction industry like a sledgehammer, devastating companies across Oregon and leaving skilled workers unemployed throughout the region, I was the one who helped Robert restructure our operations. We worked 18-hour days analyzing every contract, every expense, every potential source of revenue. We cut costs without cutting corners, renegotiated terms with suppliers who had become friends over the years, and kept every single employee on payroll even when other companies were laying off workers left and right. Some nights, Robert and I would sit in the office until midnight, surrounded by financial documents and coffee cups, figuring out how to survive another month while maintaining our commitment to quality and our responsibility to our workers. Those were the hardest times in Henderson Construction's history, but they were also when I learned the most about Robert's character and my own capabilities under pressure. Through all of this, Robert treated me like the son he never had, and I began to see him as the father figure I had always needed. He included me in major decisions that would shape the company's future, trusted me with sensitive financial information that could make or break our business, and gradually increased my responsibilities until I was essentially running the day-to-day operations while he focused on business development and client relationships. My salary reflected my importance to the company, growing from an entry-level wage to a six-figure income that allowed me to buy a house in Southeast Portland and live comfortably. More importantly, Robert made it clear through both words and actions that Henderson Construction would be passed down to me when he was ready to retire. We talked about succession planning, about my eventual ownership stake, about the legacy we were building together. Those conversations filled me with pride and purpose, knowing that my hard work and dedication were creating something lasting and meaningful. But there was one complication that I didn't fully understand until much later, a factor that would eventually challenge everything I thought I knew about my place in Robert's life and business. In 2010, when Henderson Construction was hitting its stride and winning major contracts throughout the Portland metro area, Robert adopted a child, a 15-year-old boy named Derek, whose biological parents had died in a car accident on Interstate 84 during a particularly brutal winter storm. Derek was Robert's nephew, the son of Robert's late brother Michael, and Robert stepped up without hesitation when social services needed a guardian. It was a noble thing to do, the kind of selfless act that made me admire Robert even more, and I fully supported his decision to bring Derek into his home and his life. Derek was quiet and seemed overwhelmed by his circumstances, which was completely understandable given what he had been through. Robert was determined to be a good father to Derek. He attended every school event, helped with homework, and made sure Derek had everything he needed to succeed. The boy was intelligent and had potential, but he struggled with authority and seemed resentful of any structure or expectations. Robert attributed this to trauma from losing his parents, and he bent over backward to accommodate Derek's moods and behaviors. As Derek got older and started showing more interest in what Robert did for work, the dynamic in our workplace began to shift in subtle but noticeable ways. Robert started bringing Derek to the office during summer breaks and holidays, wanting to expose him to the family business and help him understand what had provided for his comfortable lifestyle. Derek showed little genuine interest in construction or business operations, preferring to spend his time on his phone scrolling through social media or complaining about having to be there instead of hanging out with friends. When Robert tried to engage him in conversations about projects or show him how different aspects of the business worked, Derek would respond with minimal enthusiasm and obvious impatience. He was polite enough to me during these visits, addressing me as Mr. Marcus and answering questions when directly asked, but there was always an underlying tension that I couldn't quite identify at the time. What bothered me most was Derek's apparent lack of appreciation for the opportunities Robert was providing. While other teenagers worked part-time jobs to earn spending money, Derek received a generous allowance without any corresponding responsibilities. While other kids had to earn their privileges through good grades and behavior, Derek seemed to expect expensive gifts and freedoms as his natural right. I watched Robert work longer hours to pay for Derek's private school tuition, car insurance, and social activities, all while Derek showed no recognition of the sacrifices being made on his behalf. It reminded me of the stark contrast with my own upbringing, where every dollar was earned through hard work and every opportunity was valued because it wasn't guaranteed. The real problems began when Derek turned 18 and started college at the University of Oregon in Eugene. Robert was paying for everything: tuition that exceeded $40,000 per year, room and board in one of the nicest dormitories on campus, spending money that allowed Derek to live more comfortably than most working adults, and a brand new Toyota Camry that Derek had specifically requested. Derek was studying business administration, though he seemed to view college more as an extended social experience than an educational opportunity. Robert constantly talked about how Derek would eventually join Henderson Construction and learn the construction business, following the same path of gradual responsibility and hands-on learning that had shaped my own career. The difference was that Derek had never shown any genuine interest in the construction industry, had never voluntarily spent time on a job site, had never worked a day in his life, and seemed to view Henderson Construction as nothing more than his automatic inheritance rather than a business built on decades of hard work, dedication, and sacrifice. During Derek's college years, Robert would drive down to Eugene regularly to visit, bringing care packages and taking Derek and his friends out for expensive dinners. Derek would come home for holidays and summer breaks, but he spent most of his time socializing with friends or traveling to music festivals and spring break destinations that Robert funded without question. When Robert suggested that Derek might work for Henderson Construction during summer breaks to gain experience, Derek always had excuses about internships, summer classes, or other commitments that prevented him from getting his hands dirty in the family business. I began to suspect that Derek had no real intention of working in construction but was simply allowing Robert to believe otherwise to maintain his comfortable lifestyle. In 2019, Derek graduated from college with mediocre grades and an attitude that suggested the world owed him something simply because he had completed his degree. His graduation ceremony was held on a beautiful spring day in Eugene, with Mount Hood visible in the distance and families celebrating their children's achievements. Robert was bursting with pride, taking photos and talking to other parents about Derek's bright future in the family business. I attended the ceremony at Robert's invitation, and I watched Derek interact with his classmates and their families with a casual arrogance that made me uncomfortable. He talked about Henderson Construction as if he had built it himself, referring to future plans and business strategies without any acknowledgement of the experience and expertise required to actually implement them. Robert immediately offered Derek a position at Henderson Construction as a junior manager, despite my private concerns about Derek's work ethic and complete lack of relevant experience. The offer included a starting salary that exceeded what most experienced construction workers earned after years in the industry, a company car, and a clear path to increased responsibilities and eventual ownership. I tried to approach the subject diplomatically with Robert during a private conversation in his office, suggesting that Derek might benefit from starting in an entry-level position to learn the business from the ground up, just like I had 20 years earlier. I explained that understanding every aspect of construction work was essential for effective management, and that our employees would respect Derek more if he demonstrated his willingness to work alongside them. Robert dismissed my concerns, saying that Derek was family and deserved a chance to prove himself at a management level. Derek's first year at the company was challenging for everyone involved. He consistently arrived late, left early, and showed little interest in learning the technical aspects of our business. When I assigned him projects, he would delegate them to other employees rather than doing the work himself. He made expensive mistakes because he didn't bother to learn our procedures, and he had a habit of overriding decisions made by more experienced employees simply because he could. The other employees began coming to me privately with complaints about Derek's behavior. They felt disrespected and frustrated by his attitude, and several longtime workers started looking for jobs elsewhere. I found myself in an impossible position. I couldn't discipline Robert's adopted son without causing family drama, but I couldn't allow Derek's poor performance to damage company morale and operations. I tried several times to discuss the situation with Robert, but he was blind to Derek's faults. Whenever I brought up specific examples of Derek's poor performance, Robert would make excuses or suggest that Derek just needed more time to adjust. It became clear that Robert was so invested in his role as Derek's father that he couldn't separate his parental feelings from his business judgment. The situation reached a breaking point in late 2023. We were working on a major residential development project worth $3 million, our largest contract ever. I had been managing the project for months, coordinating with subcontractors, managing timelines, and ensuring quality control. Everything was going smoothly until Robert decided that Derek should take over as project manager to gain more experience with large-scale operations. I was shocked by this decision and tried to explain to Robert why it was a mistake. The project was too complex for someone with Derek's limited experience, and we couldn't afford any mistakes with such an important client. Robert insisted that Derek was ready for the responsibility and that I would be there to guide him if needed. Against my better judgment, I agreed to support Derek while he managed the project. Derek immediately began making changes without consulting me or understanding the implications. He rescheduled subcontractors without checking availability, changed material specifications without considering cost implications, and ignored quality control procedures that had been carefully established. Within 2 weeks, the project was behind schedule and over budget. Subcontractors were frustrated and threatening to walk away from the job. I worked overtime trying to fix Derek's mistakes while still maintaining my other responsibilities. I spent my weekends on the job site personally overseeing work that should have been Derek's responsibility. I used my relationships with suppliers and subcontractors to negotiate solutions to problems that Derek had created. I was essentially doing two jobs while Derek took credit for the successes and blamed others for the failures. The final straw came during a heated meeting with the client in December 2023. The homeowners were understandably upset about the delays and cost overruns, and they demanded explanations. Derek sat in the meeting and threw me under the bus, claiming that I had been responsible for the problems because I hadn't provided adequate guidance and support. He painted himself as the victim of poor mentorship while I sat there in stunned silence. After the client meeting, I confronted Derek privately in his office. I explained calmly and professionally how his decisions had created the problems we were facing, and I offered to help him develop a plan to get the project back on track. Derek's response changed everything between us and ultimately led to the events that would reshape both of our lives. "Listen, Marcus," Derek said with a smirk that I had never seen before. "I appreciate everything you've done for this company. I really do. But at the end of the day, you're just an employee. I'm family. Dad might value your loyalty, but loyalty doesn't make you family. This company will be mine someday, and I think it's time you started remembering your place." Those words hit me like a physical blow. After 23 years of dedication, sacrifice, and loyalty, Robert's adopted son was essentially telling me that I would never be anything more than hired help. The casual dismissiveness in his voice made it clear that he had never viewed me as anything other than an obstacle to his inheritance. I left Derek's office that day with a clarity I had never experienced before. I realized that Robert's blind spot regarding his adopted son was going to destroy the company we had built together. More importantly, I realized that my loyalty and dedication meant nothing if they could be so easily dismissed by someone who had never earned his position or contributed meaningfully to our success. That evening, I went home to my apartment in Southeast Portland and sat on my balcony looking out at the city lights. The rain was falling steadily, and I thought about all the years I had invested in Henderson Construction. I thought about the early mornings, the late nights, the weekends spent on job sites, the family gatherings I had missed because work came first. I thought about how I had prioritized Robert's dreams over my own relationships and personal goals. For the first time in decades, I began seriously considering my options outside of Henderson Construction. I had built a reputation in Portland's construction industry, and I had connections throughout the region. My experience and track record would make me valuable to any number of companies, or I could potentially start my own business. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Over the next few weeks, I began quietly exploring opportunities while continuing to work at Henderson Construction. I reached out to former clients, suppliers, and industry contacts to gauge interest in my services. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Several companies expressed interest in hiring me, and 3 different clients offered to provide funding and contracts if I decided to start my own construction company. Meanwhile, Derek continued to struggle with the residential development project. Despite my continued efforts to minimize the damage, the project was becoming a disaster. Cost overruns exceeded $200,000, and we were 3 months behind schedule. The clients were threatening legal action, and our reputation in the industry was suffering. Robert was finally beginning to see the problems, but he still refused to acknowledge Derek's role in creating them. Instead, he seemed to blame external factors and bad luck. He asked me to take over the project completely, but Derek objected, claiming that it would undermine his authority and development as a manager. Robert sided with Derek, asking me to continue supporting him rather than taking direct control. That's when I made my decision. I couldn't continue to enable Derek's incompetence while watching everything Robert and I had built together fall apart. More importantly, I couldn't continue working for someone who would always prioritize his adopted son's ego over the company's success and my contributions. In January 2024, I requested a private meeting with Robert in his office. The space was exactly as it had been when I first started working there: family photos on the desk, construction awards on the walls, and the same leather chairs where we had made countless important decisions together. Robert welcomed me with the same warm smile he had always shown, completely unaware of what I was about to tell him. "Robert," I began carefully, "I need to talk to you about my future with Henderson Construction. I could see the concern immediately appear in his eyes. Over the past few months, I've been doing a lot of thinking about my career and my goals. After 23 years here, I think it might be time for me to explore new opportunities. Robert's face went pale. He leaned forward in his chair and said, "Marcus, if this is about money, we can discuss a raise. If it's about responsibilities, we can restructure your role. You're essential to this company. I can't imagine running it without you." I had prepared for this conversation, but hearing the genuine concern and affection in Robert's voice made it more difficult than I had expected. "It's not about money or responsibilities, Robert. It's about respect and recognition. I've given this company everything I have for over 2 decades, and I've been proud to do it. But recent events have made me realize that my contributions will never be valued the way I hoped they would be." Robert asked me to be more specific, so I explained the situation with Derek's dismissive comments and his pattern of taking credit for successes while blaming others for failures. I described how demoralized the other employees had become and how Derek's poor performance was damaging our reputation with clients. I was careful not to attack Derek personally, but I made it clear that I couldn't continue working in an environment where my experience and expertise were undermined. Robert listened quietly, and I could see him processing everything I was saying. When I finished, he was quiet for several minutes. Finally, he said, "Marcus, Derek is young and still learning. I know he's made mistakes, but he's family. I have to give him a chance to grow and prove himself. Can't you be patient a little longer?" That response confirmed everything I had suspected about Robert's priorities. I looked at this man who had been like a father to me for over 20 years, and I realized that his biological connection to Derek would always trump our professional relationship and personal bond. It wasn't malicious or intentional, it was just human nature. But it meant that my future at Henderson Construction would always be limited by Derek's presence and Robert's protective instincts. "I understand your position, Robert," I said quietly. "Derek is your son, and you want to see him succeed. But I can't continue to sacrifice my career and reputation to facilitate his learning process. I've made the decision to start my own construction company, and I'll be submitting my formal resignation at the end of this week." The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of my life. Robert alternated between trying to convince me to stay and expressing hurt that I was abandoning him and the company. He offered me partnership stakes, salary increases, and promises that Derek's role would be restructured to minimize conflicts. But I had already made my decision, and no amount of money or promises could change the fundamental dynamic that had developed. My final week at Henderson Construction was emotionally exhausting. Robert seemed to be going through the stages of grief, moving from denial to anger to bargaining. He accused me of being selfish and disloyal, then apologized and begged me to reconsider. The other employees were shocked by my departure, and several asked if they could join my new company when I was ready to hire. Derek's reaction was predictably dismissive. He seemed to view my resignation as confirmation that he would finally have free rein to run the company his way. He made several comments about how my departure would eliminate old-school thinking and allow Henderson Construction to modernize its operations. His lack of concern about losing the person who had been managing most of the company's operations revealed just how little he understood about the business. I officially left Henderson Construction on February 15, 2024. My last day was quiet and professional. I completed my final reports, handed over my responsibilities, and said goodbye to colleagues who had become like family over the years. Robert shook my hand at the end of the day, but I could see the hurt and confusion in his eyes. He still didn't understand why I was leaving, and I realized he probably never would. Within 2 weeks of leaving Henderson Construction, I had established Marcus Construction Solutions with backing from 3 former clients who had been impressed with my work over the years. My first contract was a commercial renovation project worth $800,000. Not huge, but enough to get started and prove myself as an independent operator. The early months of running my own company were challenging but exhilarating. I rented a small office space in southeast Portland, hired 2 experienced contractors who had left Henderson Construction shortly after my departure, and began building a client base. Word traveled quickly through Portland's construction community that I was available for projects, and referrals began coming in steadily. By summer 2024, Marcus Construction Solutions was thriving. We had completed 6 successful projects, hired additional staff, and established relationships with reliable subcontractors and suppliers. My reputation for quality work and professional management was attracting clients who valued experience and reliability over low bids and flashy presentations. Meanwhile, Henderson Construction was struggling. The residential development project that Derek had mismanaged was finally completed, but the cost overruns and delays had resulted in a lawsuit from the clients. Other projects were experiencing similar problems as Derek took on more responsibilities without the experience or judgment to handle them effectively. Several longtime employees had left the company, and recruiting replacements was difficult because word had spread about the management issues. I heard about Henderson Construction's problems through industry contacts, but I tried not to take satisfaction in their difficulties. Robert was still someone I cared about, and I took no pleasure in seeing the company we had built together struggling. But I also recognized that the problems were the natural consequences of prioritizing family loyalty over business competence. The turning point came in October 2024, 8 months after I had left Henderson Construction. I was working late in my office when I received an unexpected phone call from Robert. His voice sounded tired and strained as he asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss something important. Despite everything that had happened, I agreed to meet with him the next morning. We met at a small cafe in Northwest Portland that we had frequented during our years working together. Robert looked older than I remembered, with new lines around his eyes and gray in his hair that hadn't been there months earlier. He ordered his usual black coffee and sat quietly for several minutes before speaking. "Marcus," he finally said, "I owe you an apology. I've been thinking about our last conversation for months, and I'm beginning to understand what you were trying to tell me. Derek isn't ready for the responsibilities I've given him, and my attempts to protect and promote him have hurt both the company and our relationship." I could see that this admission was difficult for Robert, and I felt a mix of vindication and sympathy. "Robert, you don't need to apologize for caring about your son. That's what good fathers do. But running a business requires different priorities than raising a child." Robert nodded and continued, "Henderson Construction is in trouble, Marcus. We've lost 3 major clients in the past 6 months, and our reputation is suffering. Derek means well, but he doesn't have the experience or judgment to manage complex projects. I've been trying to guide him, but I'm realizing that my own judgment has been compromised by my feelings as his father." He paused and looked directly at me. "I made a mistake when I let you leave. You were the heart of Henderson Construction's operations, and I took your contributions for granted. I chose family loyalty over business sense, and it's cost me the best manager I've ever worked with." Hearing Robert acknowledge what I had tried to explain months earlier was both satisfying and sad. I had hoped that he would eventually recognize Derek's limitations and the impact of his poor decisions, but I wished it hadn't required the near collapse of the company to open his eyes. "What do you want from me, Robert?" I asked gently. "I've started my own company, and it's going well. I can't come back to Henderson Construction, if that's what you're hoping for." Robert shook his head. "I'm not asking you to come back, Marcus. I know that bridge has been burned, and I accept responsibility for that. But I am hoping that you might consider a business partnership or some kind of collaboration. Henderson Construction has established client relationships and contracts that could benefit from your management expertise. Your company has the operational excellence that we've lost. Maybe there's a way for us to work together that benefits both businesses." The proposal intrigued me, but I was cautious about getting involved with Robert and Derek again. "What about Derek?" I asked. "Any partnership would need to address the management issues that caused me to leave in the first place." Robert's expression became serious. "Derek is going to have to earn his place in this industry just like everyone else. I can't continue to protect him from the consequences of his decisions, and I can't prioritize his ego over business success. If we move forward with any kind of collaboration, it will be based on professional competence rather than family relationships." Over the following weeks, Robert and I explored various partnership possibilities. We discussed merging our companies, creating a joint venture for specific projects, or establishing a consulting relationship where Marcus Construction Solutions would provide management services for Henderson Construction projects. Each option had potential benefits and risks that needed careful consideration. During these discussions, Derek's role became a central issue. Robert acknowledged that Derek's current position as a manager was unsustainable, but he struggled with how to address the situation without damaging their father-son relationship. Derek had become accustomed to his authority and status within Henderson Construction, and any reduction in his responsibilities would likely be viewed as a betrayal or punishment. The solution came from an unexpected source. In late November 2024, Derek announced that he had been accepted into a graduate MBA program at Portland State University and wanted to pursue advanced business education to better prepare himself for eventually leading Henderson Construction. The program would require full-time commitment, meaning Derek would need to step away from day-to-day operations for 2 years. Robert was initially reluctant to support Derek's departure, worried that it would leave Henderson Construction even more shorthanded. But I encouraged him to view it as an opportunity for Derek to gain the educational foundation and maturity he needed to be effective in the construction industry. More importantly, it would give us a chance to stabilize Henderson Construction's operations and establish new management systems without the complications of Derek's presence. In December 2024, Robert and I formalized a consulting agreement between our companies. Marcus Construction Solutions would provide project management and operational oversight for Henderson Construction's major contracts, while Henderson Construction would maintain client relationships and business development activities. It wasn't a merger, but it was a partnership that allowed us to leverage our respective strengths. Derek's reaction to the partnership was mixed. On one hand, he seemed relieved to step away from the daily pressures of managing projects that he struggled with. On the other hand, he clearly viewed my return to Henderson Construction's operations as a threat to his future inheritance. He made several comments about the arrangement being temporary and his intention to resume full management responsibilities when he completed his MBA program. The partnership proved successful from the beginning. Henderson Construction's project performance improved dramatically under my management oversight, and client satisfaction returned to the high standards that had characterized the company during its best years. Meanwhile, Marcus Construction Solutions continued to grow independently, taking on projects that complemented rather than competed with Henderson Construction's work. Working with Robert again reminded me of why I had loved Henderson Construction during its early years. When we could focus on business decisions rather than family dynamics, we made an excellent team. Our different strengths complemented each other perfectly. His vision and client relationships combined with my operational expertise and attention to detail. However, I was careful to maintain clear boundaries in our renewed professional relationship. My primary loyalty was to my own company, and I made sure that Henderson Construction's consulting fees reflected the full value of my services. I also insisted on written agreements for all projects to avoid the kind of misunderstandings that had contributed to my original departure. As 2024 turned into 2025, both companies were thriving. Henderson Construction had recovered its reputation and was winning new contracts, while Marcus Construction Solutions had established itself as one of Portland's premier construction management firms. The partnership was working well, but I knew it was essentially a temporary arrangement that would need to be reevaluated when Derek completed his graduate program. The situation took an interesting turn in March 2025 when Derek called me directly to request a meeting. He had been in graduate school for 4 months and wanted to discuss his observations about the construction industry and his thoughts about Henderson Construction's future. I agreed to meet with him, curious about whether his academic studies had changed his perspective on business management. We met at a coffee shop near Portland State University, and I was struck by how much Derek seemed to have matured during his time in graduate school. He was more thoughtful and less arrogant than I remembered, and he seemed genuinely interested in learning rather than just asserting his authority. Marcus, Derek began, I've been studying business management and organizational behavior, and I'm beginning to understand some of the mistakes I made before starting graduate school. I realized that I never took the time to learn the construction industry properly, and I let my position as dad's son go to my head. This admission surprised me, and I found myself cautiously optimistic about Derek's personal growth. Graduate school can provide valuable perspective on business operations, I said. What specific insights have been most helpful for you? Derek explained that his coursework had covered topics like leadership, project management, and organizational change. He had written case studies about family businesses and the challenges of succession planning. Most importantly, he had begun to understand that effective management required earning respect through competence rather than demanding it through authority. "I want to apologize for what I said to you before you left Henderson Construction," Derek continued. "My comment about loyalty not making you family was disrespectful and ignorant. You've been more instrumental in building this company than I have, and I should have recognized that rather than trying to diminish your contributions." The apology seemed genuine, and I appreciated Derek's willingness to acknowledge his mistakes. "I accept your apology, Derek. We all make mistakes when we're young and inexperienced. The important thing is learning from them and growing as a person." Derek then proposed something that caught me completely off guard. "Marcus, I've been thinking about Henderson Construction's future, and I have a proposal that might benefit everyone involved. Rather than viewing our relationship as competitive, what if we structured the business to recognize both of our contributions and create a succession plan that reflects reality rather than just family relationships?" He went on to explain his idea for restructuring Henderson Construction as a partnership between Robert, Derek, and me, with ownership stakes reflecting our respective contributions to the company's success. Derek acknowledged that my 20-plus years of experience and operational expertise warranted significant equity participation, while his role would initially focus on business development and strategic planning rather than day-to-day management. The proposal was surprisingly mature and thoughtful, representing a complete reversal from Derek's previous attitude about his inheritance and my role in the company. I told him that I was interested in exploring the idea further, but would need to discuss it with Robert and carefully consider the legal and financial implications. That conversation led to a series of meetings between Robert, Derek, and me throughout the spring of 2025. We discussed various ownership structures, management responsibilities, and succession plans that would allow Henderson Construction to thrive while recognizing everyone's contributions appropriately. The process was sometimes difficult, as it required Robert to confront some uncomfortable truths about his previous favoritism toward Derek. But gradually, we developed a framework that seemed fair to everyone involved. Henderson Construction would be restructured as a partnership with Robert holding a controlling interest, me holding a significant minority stake reflecting my contributions and experience, and Derek holding a smaller stake that would grow as he proved himself in the business. Management responsibilities would be distributed based on expertise rather than family relationships. The key breakthrough came when Derek suggested that he should earn his increased ownership stake through performance milestones rather than receiving it automatically. He proposed spending several years learning the business from entry-level positions, just as I had done, and gradually taking on more responsibilities as he demonstrated competence. This approach would ensure that his eventual leadership role was based on merit rather than just inheritance. By summer 2025, we had finalized the partnership agreement and begun implementing the new structure. Derek returned from graduate school with a much more humble and realistic attitude about his role in the company. He started working on construction sites to gain hands-on experience, and he asked me to mentor him in project management and operational procedures. The transformation in Derek's approach was remarkable. Where he had once been dismissive and entitled, he became eager to learn and quick to acknowledge his limitations. He worked long hours without complaint, asked thoughtful questions, and showed genuine respect for the experienced employees he had previously alienated. Several longtime workers commented to me about how much Derek had changed and how much they appreciated his new attitude. Robert was initially concerned about Derek working in entry-level positions, worried that it might damage his confidence or authority. But I convinced him that Derek's credibility with employees and clients would ultimately be enhanced by demonstrating his willingness to start from the bottom and earn his advancement. The approach also allowed Derek to truly understand the construction process in a way that his previous management position had never provided. As Derek progressed through various roles in the company, our working relationship gradually improved. He began contributing valuable insights from his graduate education while learning practical skills from experienced workers. His business development efforts brought in several new clients who were impressed by his professionalism and knowledge. Most importantly, he seemed to genuinely enjoy the work and take pride in the company's success. The partnership structure also allowed me to fully invest in Henderson Construction's future, while maintaining my independence through Marcus Construction Solutions. The two companies continued to collaborate on major projects, but each maintained its own identity and client base. This arrangement provided diversification and flexibility that benefited both businesses. Looking back on this entire experience, I'm struck by how much everyone involved has grown and changed. Robert learned that effective leadership sometimes requires making difficult decisions that prioritize business success over personal relationships. Derek learned that respect and authority must be earned through competence and character rather than demanded through position or inheritance. And I learned that sometimes the best solution to a conflict isn't walking away, but rather finding a way to restructure the relationship to address underlying issues. The construction industry in Portland continues to evolve, and Henderson Construction is now well-positioned to adapt and thrive in changing market conditions. Our partnership combines the stability and client relationships that Robert built over decades with the operational excellence and innovation that I bring to project management. Derek's fresh perspective and business education add another dimension that helps us stay competitive with newer companies entering the market. More importantly, the personal relationships between Robert, Derek, and me have been rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect and clearly defined roles. Robert no longer feels torn between his roles as father and business owner, because the partnership structure accommodates both Derek's family status and my professional contributions. Derek no longer feels the pressure of living up to unrealistic expectations because he's earning his place through demonstrated performance. And I no longer feel undervalued or taken for granted because my contributions are formally recognized through equity ownership and management authority. The lesson I take from this experience is that loyalty and family relationships are both important, but they need to be balanced with fairness and competence in business contexts. Derek's original statement that loyalty doesn't make you family was wrong, but it contained a grain of truth about the complexity of workplace relationships that involve both professional and personal bonds. True loyalty isn't blind devotion that ignores problems or accepts mistreatment. True loyalty involves caring enough about people and organizations to address issues honestly and work toward solutions that benefit everyone involved. Sometimes that means having difficult conversations, setting boundaries, or even walking away temporarily to create space for growth and change. Family relationships, whether biological or chosen, require constant nurturing and adjustment as people grow and circumstances change. Robert's love for Derek as a father initially blinded him to Derek's professional limitations, but ultimately that love motivated him to find a solution that would help Derek develop into the leader he had the potential to become. My relationship with Robert was always more complex than a simple employer-employee dynamic. Over 23 years, we had become family in many ways, and that bond ultimately survived the crisis that could have destroyed it permanently. But it required restructuring our relationship to acknowledge changed circumstances and different needs. The partnership we've created isn't perfect, and it will continue to evolve as our businesses grow and our personal situations change. Derek still has much to learn about construction and business management, and there will undoubtedly be challenges as he takes on more responsibilities. Robert is approaching retirement age and will need to gradually transition his role to the next generation. And I will need to balance my commitment to Henderson Construction with my responsibilities to my own company and employees. But we've created a framework that can adapt to these changes while preserving the relationships and values that made Henderson Construction successful in the first place. We've learned that sustainable business relationships require honesty, flexibility, and a willingness to put the long-term success of the enterprise above short-term personal preferences. Today, as I write this story, Henderson Construction employs over 50 people and has annual revenues exceeding $15 million. Marcus Construction Solutions has grown to 20 employees and $8 million in annual revenue. Together, our companies have completed hundreds of successful projects and built a reputation for quality and reliability that spans the Pacific Northwest. But more than the business success, I'm proud of the personal growth that everyone involved has achieved. Robert has become a better leader by learning to separate his roles as father and business owner. Derek has earned the respect of his colleagues through hard work and humility rather than demanding it through position or family connections. And I've learned that sometimes the most important battles aren't won by walking away, but by staying engaged and working towards solutions that honor everyone's legitimate interests and contributions. The construction industry will always involve challenges, economic cycles, regulatory changes, competition, and the constant pressure to deliver quality results on time and within budget. But with the right people, the right structure, and the right commitment to both excellence and relationships, those challenges become opportunities for growth and innovation. Henderson Construction's story is far from over, and I'm excited to be part of writing its next chapters. We've built something together that reflects the best of what's possible when loyalty, family, and business success are properly balanced and mutually supportive. And that's a legacy worth building, one project and one relationship at a time.